Every moment in life has the potential to be phenomenal. At Amy Boyle Photography, we specialize in capturing those moments, whether it's for your business, a milestone event, or a personal portrait. As the host of the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, I know the power of storytelling, and I bring that same passion to my photography. Let's create images that celebrate who you are and what you stand for. Visit amyboylephotography.com to schedule your session today. Welcome to the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, Tina. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. We had so much fun together getting to know each other, and I'm delighted to be here.
Shout out to the wonderful Elizabeth who brought us together. And for those of you who don't know, I'm also a photographer besides a podcaster. So we had a branding photography session in California with Tina as most recently as last week.
Yes, we did.
To go forward, and like we do with the beginning of the show, I'd love it if you'd introduce the phenomenal you to our audience.
Well, that's quite the introduction right there. Phenomenal you. I think the best way to do this is I had a conversation yesterday with somebody where he has a little test about personality kinds of things and where you fit in the workplace. And he said, you're about the top 5% of the people in terms of your profile, meaning that it's easy for me to talk to people. I learned to be very diplomatic and gracious when I was younger. I like people. I like helping people. And that's really been the thrust of my career.
Give me a little bit more about how you translate those great skills into what you are and who you are today.
For years and years and years, all my friends would ask me for advice. And at one point in college, I said, and they would call me mother. I said, I'm not your mother. I'm not your mother. But this idea that this information would come to me, I always thought it was just common sense. How could you not know that? You know, it's like right in front of you. But I did learn that common sense is actually, now we have a name for it. It's called emotional intelligence. And I didn't learn that that was a gift, honestly, until I was about 30 years old. So that path of wanting to help people, seeing what's available, how you're operating, the problem solving is really kind of the basis of it. And so at some point I started out as a teacher, and then I moved into being a psychotherapist, because if I was going to help people, I wanted to be able to get to actually the root cause of what's actually happening. And that has led me to, like, what's really going on here? Why is this happening? And so that led me to the neuroscience and the spirituality and the energy work and all kinds of things about how we operate. How do we really operate? So there was a saying that I would say that every course that I took was, how do I help you to change at a fundamental level? Because the body gets triggered before the mind. And so that was really kind of the origin of a lot of the knowledge that I accomplished. And then I created a program called Mastery Under Pressure, because it's great that you could tell me all about your mother, your father, your sister, your brother. But if you're not changing, what do we need to actually change? And so Mastery Under Pressure is all about peak performance and getting into a state of flow. And then I was doing something with my husband. He teaches tennis, and I created a program doing the mental side of tennis. And then people said, could you take this into business? Because these skills leaders really, really, really need. So I started to move in that direction. And then somebody who I respect very much, is very wise. She said, honestly, what you do is you really do help people resolve conflict, internal conflict, external conflict. But there's a saying called not. What is it that you can not do? And I'm sure if I asked you what you could not do, it would have something to do with something visual and photo and journalism. And I cannot not get involved, although I've learned to keep back and let somebody actually ask me for permission, or I ask for permission and they give me permission to say yes. But so given what's going on today in this world and all the conflict that we have and all the differences and the diversity, and we're all looking at diverse, kind of companies and boards, and that's great. Now that you have this diverse group of people, how are you going to manage each other? How are you going to solve the problems? And that's where the real magic comes in. that's where the real challenge comes in.
Well, it's such a challenge, and I'm so grateful that you're using your skills to help those of us kind of like navigate those waters, right? Because it is a broader
Yes.
world.
Yes.
When it comes to mastery under pressure and some of your core pillars, I like the do more, do better, do faster. Maybe let our listeners know a little bit more about what you mean by that kind of mindset.
It's not necessarily get better, get faster. It's being more efficient. So just like any other skill, I ask people all the time, I have one of the slides in my slide deck of a triangle. So how many of you have spent years and years and years getting your education? PhDs, master's degrees, postdoc, all kinds of, everybody raises their hand when I have an audience. Okay, and then how many of you have spent years and years taking this education and putting and strategizing how to take it into the world so that you become, whether it's your own business or an executive or whatever, everybody raises their hand. How many of you have spent years and years, an equal amount, learning about yourself and kind of mastering these interpersonal skills? Well, the hands go way down. And yet this drives the train. Who we are, how we operate, how we think, how we communicate with one another has everything to do with the level of success that we have or don't have. And so I always say to people, this is your competitive edge. You put two people together with the same education and the same strategies, but this one knows how to manage themselves, in difficult situations, having difficult conversations. They're going to win, hands down.
And with that, I think maybe it's a trait for women in general, or maybe just I'm speaking personally, but that reserve sense, that good girl syndrome that we talk about, like waiting for permission and then translating that into confidence that's received and not pushy, bossy, blah, 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 all those things.
Exactly.
So,
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. What can you say to that? And I think we're going to be seeing more of that. Like, how can we be assertive and be heard, but not also just go out of, read the room too, right? To pay attention to what's going on.
Honestly, we're talking about, I don't want this to sound kind of woo-woo in any way, but there is masculine energy and there is feminine energy, and we are different. So the masculine energy is very forward. It's much more aggressive. Men are straight to the point. Many times they don't want to hear our conversations of how we did this and how we did that. Okay, well, so what's the bottom line? That's the way that they are wired. We are wired as to be the receptors. Okay? We take it all in, and then we disseminate the information. And so if we don't learn how to manage this part of us, the boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay, then we become the people pleasers and the approval seekers I certainly come from that background. And so I was just on a conversation with a really good friend of mine and who's had issues in her relationship. And what I learned over time is that what I think and what I feel is important. You're important, but I'm important too. And I matter and you matter. So if we both matter, how do we navigate these waters? And I think the most basic need that people have is to be heard. Just to be heard. I hear you. I may not agree with you. I may not see your point of view. I may not do it this way, but I do hear you and I respect your point of view. That goes miles and miles and miles. And honestly, that is the only way that we're going to navigate these waters of the difficulties that we're having, because we don't hear each other. We operate like this. And so you said earlier, I'm a good listener. I'm a professional listener. I have learned not to talk over people, to wait to hear what they have to say, to ask permission. Would you want to hear this? Again, these are skills. And I can't say it enough, really. All the things that we're talking about in terms of personal development is the precursor to all the greatness that, if you watch the great leaders and people that you admire and people that you just kind of want to hang around them, you want to be in their energy, you want to, they have learned, they have studied, how do I operate within me? And then what are the skills that I need to be able to get my point across? When do I know just when to keep my mouth shut? It's not going to go anywhere, or to wait. This is maybe not the right time to say this, but it has to be said. And these are the nuances of reading people, as you said, reading a room. Some people are not as gifted as others. A lack of empathy. Empathy has to be learned from the time we're very, very small. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and I had a sore foot, and my kid, said to him, "Be careful, of my mom's foot." And she comes in, she kind of gets down on her hands and knees, and she goes, "Oh, that's empathy," at a very, very early age. And so learning to, lick each other's wounds and care for one another. These are the most basic human needs.
It's just innate in little children to just the way they care for their animals and nature, and all these things. With what you were just talking about, so that we're not so reactive. I think a lot of times, right? It's like, I have to say something. I have to respond. I have to be seen. And to your point about like, watch the leaders whose energy you want to be around. There's usually this air of calm,
Yes.
And so what is something that you've learned about how to cultivate that in ourselves, how to present and receive information and give information back, but in the most productive way possible, I suppose.
So one of my favorite stories is, I had a client many, many years ago who was extremely anxious. And he would walk into my office, and he had a tape recorder. That's how long ago it was. And he would put it down on my desk, and he'd say, "Can I tape the sessions?" I said, "Of course you can. They're your sessions." So he walks in one day, and he takes his tape recorder and he slams it down on my desk. And he says, "I don't know what you do to me." He said, "But I walk in here really anxious and I walk out really calm, and I cannot find it on the tape." And I said to him, "So what I do is I work on myself." And so creating a sense of calm within starts with the breath. Your breath is the only voluntary operation that you have that can change your nervous system. So when we're feeling anxious and we can recognize, and we're close enough to like, what's going on? I'm starting to notice that my shoulders are getting tighter. My stomach is starting to churn. Or my heart's racing really fast. I'm going to take this, because I did this in my TEDx talk. I created this little mantra: cut, stop, just stop before you say anything, before you do anything. Okay. And then reframe. Okay, so what's going on? I kind of notice my thoughts and my feelings that are running through my head and my mind. Oh, that person just said something to me that really hurt my feelings. Now I got it. Okay, then now how do I want to respond? So it's cut, reframe, respond. And if you kind of practice that as a little mantra, thinking of like a movie, a movie that's running really fast, and then we kind of break down, the frames, frame by frame by frame. I see it. Oh, it registers now. And now I can choose my behavior, as opposed to just being reactive, which is the most natural thing that we do. I mean, without kind of the education, we do what comes naturally. We do what kids do. If you look at, you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. You bomb me, I'm going to bomb you back. I mean, we're operating at such a child level, really, and so in order to grow up, we have to go through these necessary stages, these difficult times. We go through adolescence and and then we become adults, and each one of these stages has developmental tasks. And going back to my early roots, in psychology, we have developmental tasks that we have to kind of work through and get through. In Judaism, if years ago, you couldn't study the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mystical path, until you were at least 40 years old, because you had to have enough life behind you in order to accept the wisdom of what was actually happening. And through education and teaching and growing and learning, we can do a lot better. The information's there. I wasn't born with this. I had good parents, but they didn't know this. So just studying and practicing and getting your nervous system, using that breath over and over and over and over and over again, as soon as I feel just so what you did just before we started, right? You said I usually have a countdown, but I have to do my own countdown. Now I'm grounded. Now I can think, because this is the problem when we get overreactive and go into our sympathetic nervous system. The first thing that goes is this part of the brain. And this is the part that we need. This is our executive functioning, called the prefrontal cortex. It's the one that is the problem solver. But the other part of us is ready for fight, flight, or freeze. And the brain goes offline. So for leaders, again, this is so important. The greatest times that you need to make really, really important, quick decisions, and you can't think clearly, you're in trouble.
Yes. And with that breath work and getting people to a state of calm, then you can work on, or in tandem, I suppose, the building trust and resilience. So so now we're getting to this stage, or hopefully it's simultaneous, but for some people, like you said, we have to put in the work to do the soul searching to figure all this out. So when it comes to trusting at a new level, and again, how vulnerable should we be? What is seen as strong versus weak? I'd love to hear your take on that.
So I have a wonderful saying that I learned somewhere along the line, that great strength is how vulnerable can you be. So we have this idea that being vulnerable makes us weak. It's not true, because when we're vulnerable, and again, we're talking degrees. When you're talking trust, you're talking about safety. And so we want to make sure that we are as safe as we can be with who we are sharing our most intimate kinds of secrets. Again, in this day and age, with the media and anything that you could put on could be worldwide in a split second. So you want to watch your words, and you want to be able to think about the consequences of, if I say this, am I prepared for this? Am I prepared for that? Am I prepared for that? Because anything could come your way. As we see that, people that are like us, we think we have, everybody's like us. Well, they're not. They're not. So I always like to trust the environment. I like to take one little step forward. So when I meet somebody, whoever it is, I'm just going to put out a couple of things, and I'm going to see how they receive it. Sometimes, the way they receive it is they're looking around, they're not listening to what I'm having to say. That may be the end of that relationship very quickly. One of the things that I learned when I had gotten divorced after 34 years of marriage, and I was 57 and 14, literally. And just going out into the world again, into the dating world, and which had changed so absolutely dramatically, I would kind of take people at their word. Oh, you say you're going to call. I think you're going to call. You say you're going to do this. Oh, you want me to go with you? Oh, great. And then I started to think of, oh, what am I doing? I'm attracting all these people who are, not responsible. And what I kind of learned after that was I just wasn't waiting long enough to see how they showed up, rather than just taking somebody on their word. Okay, you say you're going to show up. Let's see. And that was a major, major insight for me. So as you began to show up, then I could give a little bit more of myself. You give a little, I give a little, you give a little. And over time, we build trust. Trust has to be earned. Just because you're my father doesn't mean that I trust you or respect you. Or just because you're my boss doesn't mean that the same thing. You have to earn my trust. And that means that you have to say what do what you say you're going to do, and be that person that I feel like I want to have in my life. So you see how it just kind of spreads, Amy, from the individual, the early, how we grow, how we learn, and then how we take ourselves out into the world. and how we become as big as perhaps our potential allows us, and our ambition or desires take us. But each time that we grow, it's another challenge. Companies that I was consulting with one company where they were a startup, but I think they were also up to about 200 people at that point. And he said, every time we grow, I need to actually refresh my management team, my executive team, because the one who's only managed 200 people is not going to be the one that's going to manage 1,000. And so we have to keep growing.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey there, Phenomenal listeners. It's Amy Boyle. If you're loving the stories and insights on the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Good Pods. Your 5-star reviews help us reach even more people and keep bringing you great content. Thank you so much for your support and being a part of our phenomenal community. Now back to the show.
And with that growth, kind of goes back to where we started in the beginning, where you said, one of the things in your professional journey was working with your husband's tennis coaching and talking about peak performance and training your mind as preparation. So we're no longer just accepting it as, well, here I am today. It's like, no, where do I want to be? I had someone on 2 weeks ago talking about, before having children, what her intentional parenting goals were, because who do I want to see when this child becomes 18? Going back into the training and being prepared, but also flexible, like anticipating. I would love to, whether it's tips on that for our audience or a key story from something that you've encountered.
So I do believe that how flexible you can be is the key to great mental health and being able to live in this world. Because when our reality is over here and our expectations are over here, we have nothing but frustration and disappointment in between. So how quickly can I get my expectation that I had, and now I'm very disappointed, into my reality? Okay, this is where I am today, at this moment in time, because this is the only moment that we have any control over. Right? So my one little story from this is I was a part of a 200-woman chorus, and we were going to Ireland from I lived in New Hampshire at the time. We were going to Ireland. Now herding 200 women just to go to the restroom. 2 buses, stopping in a restroom was a major thing. And and I was the mental health kind of advisor for this group. But the leader had a little thing, and she'd go like this. And this meant what was 2 minutes ago is no more. And we were supposed to go and perform at this one place, and the owner or the manager of the hotel actually passed away, and they closed the hotel. So we couldn't go there at a certain time, and then we had to make all these changes, and one woman started to complain, and then the next woman, and then the next. It was like, whispering down the lane. And it's like, okay, done. Here we are today. Okay. And sometimes it takes a little time to readjust, as you and I were just talking about. Sometimes we need time to grieve and mourn that what we dreamed about is not happening, or relationships or jobs or promotions or, all kinds of things have not materialized. Okay. Let's how quick it can, this is where we are. And that would be and then the other thing that my favorite way that I get myself out of a lot of situations is what's in my control, what's out of my control. First question I ask myself when I start to feel anxious or I'm losing it, or what's in my control, what's out of my control. Okay. If I can't control the external, many times I can't, I have to control the internal. How do I respond to this? A situation that I have absolutely no control over, or where can I be instrumental in using my skills and my wits to help make a change? So you see, so what's happening all the time, there's all this inner conversation, being in the present with what's going on around me. And you asked, how do you manage that? It's through the self-knowledge and the intuition, paying attention to my intuition. This doesn't feel really good. I don't know if I could trust this person. I'm hearing things that it just makes me uncomfortable. And when we're desperate, we make desperate decisions. And so recognizing I'm feeling desperate right now, I best not make that decision. Or I'm feeling stuck. Okay, I'm really feeling stuck. I need another point of view. I need somebody to kind of help me walk through this. So that's coming back to being vulnerable. You know, I'm not the be all and the end all. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. And okay, I admit them. Right? Might not be happy with what I said or what I did, but I'm really, really, really sorry. Which brings me to another thing that I think is really important when I started talking about diversity in groups and teams and boards. And sometimes if we don't know our own biases, we can just walk into something that would just offend somebody without even realizing it. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I was at a meeting and I said something afterwards, and afterwards I said to myself, that was a bias of mine. Where did that come from? Because I could feel myself uncomfortable after the conversation. So then I had to go back to that person and I said, you know, I think I was being really insensitive. And I apologized. And she said, oh, thank you so much. That saved a relationship.
You know, we told this line of we have to be as perfect as possible. And that's just not reality. And to everything we've talked about, I mean, growth happens when we acknowledge that we need to change, right? And that'll get picked up on by those that we encounter. And that that huge act of humility, going, gosh, I was uncomfortable with this. Here's a bias. I was talking about that with some photojournalist students too. Everything that we put in our frame, right, is our perceived bias. So how do we make sure that we take multiple frames so that we can see the big picture? Well, as our time is winding up, I would love it if you have a charge, a call to action, because maybe more than a handful of us are kind of sitting with there's more. And what is that?
So the one thing I would love to offer is honestly a consultation. If you are that person who has great dreams and great aspirations and is feeling a little bit stuck, or you're part of a team, an executive team, and you're feeling like there's kind of issues going on that nobody's talking about, the elephant in the room, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation. And so I know you're going to put on your notes ways that people can get in touch with me. I do have a podcast. It's called Under the Hood, where we talk in ways of the important things that we're talking about right now, that patterns that are created in childhood impact us as grown up. It's called Under the Hood. Tina at Mastering Under Pressure is how to get in touch with me.
Well, fantastic. And yes, absolutely. Everything will be linked in the show notes for how to get in touch with you, as well as the web link for scheduling a consultation with you. And then this will all be wrapped up in a nice blog post that'll come out in a day or so. Beautiful. So I can't thank you enough for making the time to chat today. It feels like your client said when he threw down the recorder, you know, I feel I came in stressed out and I'm walking out relieved. And thank you for that gift.
Yes, thank you. I'll add one last thing. Whenever I get really stressed, I say to myself, the name of your company, the name of your book, the name of your program is called Mastering Under Pressure. It's called Mastering Under Pressure. So I keep reminding myself, and that's what we did today, right?
Absolutely. Well, keep on doing it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Speaking of Phenomenal. Be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and even share the podcast, as well as stay tuned for more inspiring conversations. Remember, each and every one of you is capable of extraordinary things. Until next time, take care and remember, you are phenomenal.